cannot tell you how my heart is in my throat. I am watching my screen here. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for having faith in me. I think we are live. Yes, if I could, I would do cartwheels around the grow space, but there are several reasons I'm not doing that. One of them is age. Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you how freaked out I've been here sitting for the last 5 minutes, just wondering, is it going to be okay? Anyway, here we are. Thank you for being here. I so appreciate it. I thought if I have any background, we might as well make the background purdy and put the Cattleya maxima up there in case, you know, not just the voice, but also something to look at. Hey, Fernanda, it's good to see you. And Andyland, yay! Yeah, yay, me too. I'm so happy, I can't tell you. Now, I hope that nothing goes wrong tonight. And if it does, well, I shall keep trying. Hey, Danya, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. And Brea, now, for purposes of audio safety, I will be shutting down my YouTube side of things here, that window. I'm going to just stick with the windows that I need just to be on the safe side. Right. So what I was thinking for today was to do a quick review, and I'm not going to look at an entire 10-minute video unless I'm hearing contradictions in as an update to what I would have changed based on this video about my recipes. I thought that back in the day it would be a great idea if somebody is a little bit overwhelmed when hearing about fertilizing and ppm TDS. You know, you get these recipe cards, you can do them for cooking. So I made mine back in the day for fertilizing, just to keep my mind on track. And I thought it was a good time now to do a little update on that, go over the recipe cards again, and address any questions based on the information. And to start that off, I think it's also a good idea to revisit the video. And if everything checks out with regards to the information, I'm going to pull up each recipe card again separately, and then confirm what I've been saying and maybe talk about some tweaking adjustments. And of course, any questions. And I have from Andyland several questions which I will address. And let's just have a look-see at that video first. Make sure that we are staying on track here. I hope everybody is having a fabulous day. Had a fabulous day. I can see the sun is shining on Sandy's orchids, and that is fabulous. That is much, much needed. I was expecting a very overcast day today, and it turned out to be beautifully sunny. I couldn't bring them out all in one go. I had to stagger my shuffling this morning based on how the sun was warming areas up, because we only went down to we got down to 6 degrees last night, which means it was 10 degrees when I woke up. And who wants to get out there? Definitely not my orchids. But the Ancelia africanas went straight up onto their west side perch because the sun had hit that. Then came the Ampoyathea, and then bit by bit, you know, where's the next pocket? Ooh, I can put this one out, and so on and so forth. Anyway, why am I not sharing my screen? Do you mind? Okay, you want to do it this way? Goodness me. We're going to have to take you down. There we go. Now I'm going to put you full screen. I've been practicing again because my confidence has taken a hit. Right, as per usual, highlight my channel name so that I can see you, spell out my entire name if there are any audio issues, and we're going to go through the whole rigmarole of me muting, and hopefully if their frames are dropping, let them catch up and continue. Any disruptions from the dogs, a welcoming committee to my daughter, anything of the sorts, forgive me. Same thing, I will mute. I'll try to react quickly. Let's get going, and let me know if you can hear this.
In this video, and I hope that I will be able to achieve what I'm trying to do here. Basically, I want to put out some recipe cards.
And any questions, of course, in the chat, also let me know.
Values for organic or inorganic growing. and using the different seasons as
Okay, we can pass the introduction.
much like our
This
previous
woman does talk a
generations
lot,
did with recipe cards for
but
the
I think
kitchen
she's
and
improving.
cooking. None of these products I am showing today am I affiliated with in
And
no
I'm
way,
still
shape,
not.
or form. And I'm also going to put a disclaimer out there. This is the first year I'm using Rain Mix. I have been using MSU Fertilizer.
Now, to the subject of Rain Mix. When I say I've been using Rain Mix for 1 year, I cannot determine, of course, any results. I have used MSU Fertilizer for 2 years, K-Lite for 1 year, using Rain Mix now. And if anybody is going to ask me how I like the performance as such, I'm not going to put any kind of opinion out there. For the time being, I can say nothing's changed. Also, because of my conditions during the winter, it is never ever the fertilizer fault. So just in case you're wondering, and I just wanted to make sure that I specify that the Rain Mix is not at fault, but whether it is better than the other two I've tried over the years, at this point in time, it's too early to tell. It is my opinion that if you're going to try something out when it comes to orchids, you need to at least try it out the same length of time that you've done with your previous fertilizer to then understand whether it is better, the same, or worse. Unfortunately, orchids, slow metabolism. Yeah, it takes time to figure that out.
For the past years, but I'm switching to Rain Mix simply because it was given to me and
Yes.
I've always wanted to use it. None of the
True.
products I'm showing you today are the make all break all of fertilizer or supplements.
Correct.
And I also want to qualify something that on my channel I make a clear distinction between fertilizers and supplements.
Still do.
Not just how I talk about them, but also how I apply them.
Still
I
do.
keep them separate. I never mix my nutrient solution. Mixing.
Now, the only reason I do that is because I like to keep things simple at my end. I do struggle with dyslexic tendencies. Some days I have full-blown dyslexia, and other days I can just feel them niggling in my background. And if I keep everything separate, then I can control it and not make a mistake. I'm not well versed in the chemistry side of things. So if I'm doing a soak, it is only that. I do not mix, with the exception of sometimes if I've gotten too heavy-handed with my pH down, I will add drops of silicone to pH up to get my pH where I want it to. But these minutiae drops of silicone make absolutely no difference. And now it is very rare that I have, like, you know, too much pH down in my solution. But that is what I used to do back in the day. So if you are mixing your fertilizers with your supplements, then please don't think that what I'm saying is what you should be doing. It's just, for me, it's safe. I feel more comfortable that way. I know what my orchids are getting, and I know I am not locking out any other nutrients simply because I do not have the understanding of what does what with the other and at what percentage that lockout begins. Okay, so I've done a lot of videos about fertilizer and locking out one nutrient because another one is too heavy or too much. Now that's all fine, but I cannot determine with the low parts per million that I use, or anybody maybe in the orchid hobby uses, I cannot determine what is the percentage of that one nutrient that could be in excess to cause another one to lock out. For me, this is like a safety precaution. That's the only reason. Doesn't mean that it's right or what you're doing is wrong. My nutrient solution is, we'll get to that with a recipe card because it changes. So yeah, stop talking. Let's get to the recipe cards.
Into my fertilizer. See the rest, I consider the meals as humans. And then we have meal opinion, diet, and then we have supplements that are application safe and easy for you to copy and follow, or even tweak to your life.
And that was important for these recipe cards, to be able to take screenshots, and then you can also, I left a little bit of a note section either to copy, follow, or tweak.
To your preference, to your environment. Another point of reference when it comes to these recipe cards is orchids in active growth. That is when these recipe cards apply. An orchid that's not doing anything, no fertilizer. Water, yes.
That is what I do. That is what I do.
Let's get into the recipe card for winter. Fertilizing. Large orchids, 160 parts per million, medium orchids, 100 parts per million, and small orchids, 50 parts per million pH at 6.5 for inorganic growing and 6.7 for organic growing. In spring, large orchids 200.
Okay, let me just back that up a little bit. Let's go back to the winter and see if that all still makes sense. And according to what I'm seeing at first glance, seeing as these are my recipes, that all makes a lot of sense. So Sandy, my nutrient solution is large orchids, and I categorize big cattleyas in that 160 parts per million. Keep in mind, I grow with very cold temperatures during the winter and not 14 hours of light. Keep that in mind, okay? Now, a cattleya will also grow very well if it has sufficient light and if the temperatures are correct with 160 parts per million. It's not to say it's not going to do well. It's just a question of whether your cattleya is going to absorb that, and if you then figure out she's absorbing all the nutrients, you've got no salt buildup, then in your winter you can also up the quantity of this fertilizer, let's say reference that I put out, based on your grow space and your temperatures, and most importantly, how much light for how long are you giving your orchids, all right? So these are my very conservative fertilizing amounts for the orchids in my collection. And when I say a small orchid, I include seedlings, and that would also be tolumnias. So any miniature small orchids, including seedlings, 50 parts per million if in active growth. So that is on the notes section. If you look down there, you can apply when in active growth, including root activity. Even if there's no new leaf, no new root, no new growth pushing, if there's active root growth, that is in my books defined as active growth as well. What I do, and because the orchids don't absorb much during the winter, if they are not in active growth, I just water, I keep them nicely watered, and I only flush.
In spring, large orchids 200 parts per million, medium orchids 130 parts per million, small orchids 70 parts per million.
Right. And that is still true today, depending on how much light I am getting. In spring, the day lengths have already increased. Even though maybe the, the daylight saving time has not changed, the light is, we've already got longer days. So I do start upping the fertilizer on orchids in active growth, because I know that even, let's say, what I've considered now very dark conditions in my grow space, come spring, let's say end of February, March, I know that's not really spring yet, but that is when we can see a very good increase in the day length. That's when I start to up a little bit. You can see it's only 40 parts per million for the large orchids. But even though in relation, in perspective, let's put it in perspective, what now would be a darker room, the darker room stays dark, but for longer, if that makes sense, before nightfall hits. So they do get increasingly more light, even though it's not the bright light that, you know, you would think if you've got supplemental lights. Now, what mine are doing, of course, is they go outside on a sunny day all the time, every day. So it makes sense then also to up the fertilizer, because instead of being out at until 5 p.m., already now I can leave them out until 6 p.m. That's already an hour more than what I was able to do mid-December. I was already starting to bring orchids in based on their temperature, lack of temperature tolerance at 5 p.m., finishing with the colder tolerant orchids at 6 p.m. So that's my shuffle rhythm. And that is why I start to up in the spring, I start to up the fertilizer. For orchids in active growth, and if they're not growing actively, I'm still only watering and flushing.
And the small orchids include seedlings.
Let me touch upon the subject of the pH. It's hidden somewhat under my bloom there. Inorganic media at 6.5 and organic at 6.7. The reason I say that is because of the temperatures. Once again, they play a big part as to what nutrients in a nutrient solution, we're talking fertilizer, want to be absorbed. And of course, the pot will be, even in a wet-dry cycle, a little bit wet for longer So you can go up with a 6.7 pH depending on the quality and the length your media has been in the pot. It'll slowly decrease and drop down a little bit, which gives you that pH swing and all the nutrients can be absorbed. But you can see that I'm steady with all the pHs. Nothing changes for most of the season, and we'll see what we get to when we're talking about soaks.
The fertilizer should be pH at 6.5 in inorganic media and 6.7 in organic media. The recipe for summer: large orchids, 300 parts per million.
Boom. Summertime when the living is easy. Okay, looking forward to this because it is 300, 200, 100. I still fertilize along these lines, but during the summer, my orchids reservoir are empty twice a week. So per week, I'm actually giving them 600 parts per million in the split increments, okay? 600, 400, or 200, but each solution, each reservoir fill is according to the parts per million that I put up here. Now, of course, the orchids are doing well, lots of light, lots of heat, and most of them are in active growth. But I don't want to go to 600 parts per million, which is possible per fertilizing, because I have a dry top layer. Now, the bigger the orchids get, I talk about being careful about getting into a rut when it comes to a routine, better said. It's a routine. Now you've got your fields, you've got the groove, you're fertilizing, everything is just bloop, bloop, 2 drops here, blah, blah. And you're doing this consistently, and it comes the next year, and it worked well for you the year before, and you're doing it again, and happy days. I warn against that if your orchids are growing, because as they increase in size, keep that in mind. These are the base fertilizer limits that I would put in that are safe. But if your orchid from year to year grows slowly into specimen size, you don't want to be doing 300 parts per million, even if you need to do that 2 or 3 times a week. You want to go up and do what the orchid is doing and increase the fertilizer, because there's so much more that she needs to take up and absorb. We don't want to be using the back organs, the storage organs, as reserves. We want to keep them just as healthy as what is happening in the front. The easiest way to know if you need to up your fertilizer is, for example, and you will only know that if this growth season ends and your other growths were smaller than previously, or if you're seeing signs of deficiency in the back structures that are not just because of aging, they're showing signs of magnesium deficiency, nutrient, like the mobile nutrients, they will move to the front. Now, once again, we're in a hobby where the metabolism is super, super slow. So what you want to do is preempt that. It is easier to reduce your fertilizer because you might be getting some salt buildup than trying to play catch up, because the metabolism of the orchid won't allow you to correct something quickly, in inverted commas. It's best to go heavier if your orchid has grown the last year and you're starting to fertilize again. And then if you see that maybe it's too much, then bring it down a little bit again. And if you've got salt buildup that won't budge at the surface, remove the media at the surface of the pot, replace with fresh media. Tune down your fertilizer just a notch. If you're not going to go with 600, try it with 450 and then see how that goes. So I advise during these new seasons, new growing seasons, to test the limitations of the orchid by being generous with your fertilizer compared to the previous year of what you've been doing, and then see how it goes. Okay, my recommendation. Now, some orchids in the summer do not grow, even though they're warm to hot growers. Oddly enough, I have found that to be the case. I was so surprised, let's put it that way, when my Rincolelia digbyana, warm to hot grower, high light, I mean, we're blasting the heat onto her on the east side of the patio, and she does nothing, in inverted commas, that I can see on the surface of the pot. During the month of June, July, all the way up to mid-August, it is so bizarre. I'm like, oh, get your grow on. This is your time. Move, move, come on, because fall is coming, and then, oh, you're not going to like it. But in that case, don't fertilize, just flush. It turns out that some orchids will be very, very busy on the root activity during the hottest months of the year, and that is their jam. That is when they grow their roots to get the strength to then produce a new growth that is not going to produce roots until the following year. Hey, Patricia's Orchids, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So, if you're not entirely sure if your orchid is actually happening to take, summer holidays, maybe she's just digging herself more and more into the pot growing roots. So keep that in mind. If you have nice new growths that are not growing roots, they have matured and they have bloomed in the spring for you, and then there is no movement, bear in mind, you might as well start fertilizing because that orchid is growing roots in order to prepare for a new growth. Important to know these small little details when it comes to your orchids to understand what they're doing, even though you may not be able to see it. Now with the pH, the inorganic is at 6.3, the organic is at 6.5. I recommend that. Inorganic, again, we're talking what is the pH of your media. Because they are absorbing so fast, you want to make sure that there's a pH swing towards the upper end so that they're absorbing all the nutrients, and they can start at 6.3 and go all the way up to 6.7 or 7, depending how quickly that they absorb it. With organic media, because everything dries out so much quicker, we're going to stay at 6.5 because they need to absorb right there, bang on, in the sweet spot, all the nutrients in our nutrient chart. If you want me to pull that up sometime sporadically to get a little bit of a memory, a reminder, I'm very, very happy to do that. I don't want to rush through this subject, but I don't want to overwhelm either. So I can pull up the nutrient chart from the other day as a sporadic reminder. Just let me know if you would like me to do that. But those are the pH reasons. Quickly drying out, and you don't have time for a pH swing in organic because it's a wet dry. You want the nutrients to hit on the sweet spot very, very quickly. Now the ratios I will maintain are still the same, and then the growth of your orchid compared to the previous years. Get in there, give it some more fertilizer, see how much it can handle, because chances are it can handle a lot more in this growing season than it could in the last one.
Medium orchids, 200 parts per million. Small orchids, 100 parts per million. pH for inorganic growing at 6.3 and for organic growing at 6.5. And in fall...
Right, let's have a look at this card. Ooh, we're still going strong with the fertilizer, yes, because many orchids, like my example, Rhyncholalia digbyana, now she's starting on her new growths. So we're still pushing the summer levels because we still have plenty of daylight. The day lengths haven't shut down yet. They haven't shortened. If you are in a hemisphere where that happens, if you're around the equator, well, that's not something you need to worry about. But we're still pushing with the same fertilizer levels as per the summer, because a lot of orchids at this point in time are also coming into bloom. So the temperatures may be dropping a little bit, but we're still going strong, and we want to encourage that growth. Now, if this, for example, where you've recognized that your orchid can now take 450 or 600 parts per million at every watering, I would now reduce it back down because the pots stay wet for longer. Just to keep it out there. We don't want to push it. We've done the growing season. Everything else is now in the orchid. All we're doing is keeping that fertilizer going within the orchid to avoid any deficiencies. The strength of the growth, the size of the growth are somewhat already determined at this point in time. You're just giving the nutrients. There is no need to go gung-ho as you did in summer, unless your orchid, of course, is going with 3-4 new growths at a trot. Then you just keep going. Also, remember, if you have a cold temperature tolerant orchid, it can handle these higher fertilizer levels, if that is what you choose to do, throughout the fall, because they don't care if the temperatures drop to 10 degrees Celsius, whereas our warm to hot growers will care. So while one can push through all the way up to November, another one, we may need to dial it down just a little bit so we're not overloading the pot with salt as we head into winter. So basically, as from September, you're already planning ahead. It's like the fashion industry, except we're not thinking 6 months in advance, we're thinking 3 months in advance. So you want to dial that down for those that have already matured their growth, are starting to bloom, because in 3 months we don't want to have a salt overload in our pots where we have to be a little bit more careful when it comes to watering, flushing.
Large orchids 300 parts per million, medium-sized orchids 200 parts per million, small orchids 100 parts per million. pH at 6.3 for inorganic growing and 6.5 for organic growing.
The reason I'm saying that those levels are still the same is A, we've reduced the fertilizer on some of our orchids, so there's no fear of getting a salt overload. And B, as we move into the cooler months, our pots are staying right there, nice and wet for a considerable amount of time. So those pH ratios still apply.
Moving on to the recipes for supplements. I will be referring to the months of spring through fall as April through October. If you're in the southern hemisphere, reverse that. Epsom salts once a month, 100 parts per million.
All right, I'm going to go back to the beginning. I separate mine out, okay, just so that we have a look at this. When I say something separate, Epsom salt is magnesium. That is not to be confused with CalMag, which is a product, and you can do calcium and magnesium together using calcium nitrates. So let's not rush ahead with our thought process. I am specifically speaking about Epsom salts that you can buy at the pharmacy or anywhere else. I don't know. We buy them here at the pharmacy. So this is completely separate and isolated when I say Epsom salts, okay? Now, once again, when we come into our soaking season, let's just say spring through fall, at least that is when I can start to add this on top of what I do as far as fertilizer is concerned. I personally cannot do this in the winter. My orchids are not going to be able to handle what I'm giving them, not even at 100 parts per million. More importantly, the roots are going to stay wet too long. It's just danger. It's just, danger all around. It's like walking into a radiation, contaminated area. I cannot go there. If I had my lights on, if I had some warmth in the grow space, I would still do this, and I used to do this in the years of 2018 through 2020. I did this once a month throughout. However, very, very targeted depending on which orchids needs it most, especially the summer blooming Phalaenopsis. Because they are continuous growers in ideal conditions, you want to take that into consideration if you're doing soaks. You don't want to stick with the principle of spring through fall on any continuous grower. And at 100 parts per million, no matter the size of your orchids, it's going to be absolutely fine. They don't need much because sometimes our fertilizer may have magnesium traces of it in it, but they do need some. Continuous growers are very susceptible to nutrient deficiency during the winter months if we don't provide it with them while we keep our lights on and while we keep the temperatures nice and cozy. Now, my pH, inorganic and organic, have switched again. 6.5 for inorganic and 6.7 for organic. And I use the soak method as blitz absorption. That's why my pH is right there at the sweet spot for magnesium absorption, for its perfect absorption, because I don't want my pot to be in there, unless I forget it, hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, for the pH to regulate through the medium. More importantly, for organic media, is to get the pH spot on for maximum magnesium absorption. Soak the pot, target it by 6.7, 30 minutes, take it out, flush. That is why I suggest these kinds of pHs when it comes to soaks. When I soak in Epsom salts, I soak for an hour. Our roots don't need, our orchids don't need that. 30 minutes, is perfectly fine. However, I would then also flush the pot through once again with clean water before filling the reservoir with either fertilizer, clean water, or in the case of an organic classic setup, return it to the location for the pot to dry out. So I hope that makes sense when I talk about targeting the nutrients specifically by you going in at a pH that literally hits the moment the roots touch the water for 30 minutes and done.
At 6.5 for inorganic growing and 6.7 for organic growing, using the soak method at 30 minutes as a minimum. I consider the soak to be nitrate, spring through fall.
Okay, so if I could do my, chemistry lessons in my head, it is possible to combine a calcium nitrate as a separate component with your Epsom salts and then consider it your homemade DIY CalMag. I, again, won't do that, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. I do not know at which percentage one is too much. That locks the other one out, so I keep them separate. The same principle applies, though, to what I mentioned earlier. The pH is targeted for maximum absorption the moment the roots hit the water. Same process, 30 minutes, drain the pot, flush, etc. Again, with organic classic setups, it's always also advisable to flush the pot through after the soak, return it to the location, and let it dry out. I hope everything is making sense so far. I'm watching the chat. My dad always said, silence is good news. Know that you can interrupt me at any moment in time. There is a ticker that says this is as interactive as you want it to be, and I mean it.
April through October. Per million for organic supplements that are mixed together, but they have already been mixed for me. The CalMag is mixed and the seaweed does not interfere
Because like I said, I have to keep it
with
simple.
the CalMag functions. 2 times a month, 60.
Now, thank you, Andy Land. Now, here's the thing. I have just said I give my orchids once a month, Epsom salts. And I also give my orchids once a month calcium nitrate. And now I'm doing 2 times per month in the summer, well, mainly in the summer, not so much spring through fall because of my conditions. I do CalMag and seaweed. Well, here's the thing. Let me qualify that. CalMag being together, it is mixed. Everything is hunky-dory. They have different values, different strengths. And for that reason, I may be getting more CalMag out of the product as opposed to magnesium into my orchids. That is why I do separate soaks, because I have to build my orchids to strength for what's coming up when it turns fall, winter. You may not need to do the CalMag only, you may not need to do the Epsom salts only. You can see the dyslexia kicking in here. Epsom salts only, or the calcium only if your conditions are perfect all year round, you're growing indoors, and then your temperatures don't fluctuate. You will be able to get away with CalMag only all throughout, continuously at 100 parts per million once a month. The reason I double up in my grow season, once again, because of my conditions, I need to pump strength into the orchids, so it goes in twice a month. Thankfully, they are absorbing everything so fast, I can actually do that. And at 100 parts per million, there is no fear of anything being, let's say, over-supplemented. There's not going to be any kind of risk of an overkill. And then on top of that, after the flushing and the fertilizer solution going back in the pot, there's nothing going to happen to those roots because, once again, I'm keeping it separate. Now, when I say 100 parts, I've got to qualify. I'm seeing in my notes. You see, I haven't used CalMag and seaweed in yonks. My mind is not switched on to that. Anyway, so you see how little CalMag I'm putting in. We take the percentages of how much calcium and how much magnesium is in a product like that. Supplementing for me is always a good idea when it comes to both of them separately. The seaweed at 40 parts per million, I only start that in spring because my seaweed has growth hormones in it. And if I don't provide enough light during the winter months when they could be in active growth, like right now my durigan has just started her new growth, then pushing a hormone into something that may respond is going to confuse the orchid because it doesn't have the light to match. Then I've got a growth starting, which I would love, but now I have issues because I don't have enough light and I can't fertilize too much, otherwise there will be salt buildup. So you see the balance here of where I'm coming from with spring and fall. The reason I set up my videos the way I do is not only because of my conditions, but it is also for, let's say, 90% of anybody who were to watch my videos. If they only put CalMag and seaweed into their pots starting spring through fall, it is safe. It's going to be fine for the winter months when these are not applied. All right. So my videos are based on something that is safe throughout. If I had a full functioning grow space, I would have to change my dialogue. How do you say no? I would have to change my, I forgot the word. Anyway, how I explain things. I would have to change that and say, I'm doing this because my conditions are permanently hot and my light levels are XYZ. Now, that wouldn't apply for everybody because not everybody can do that, and not everybody grows, let's say, with a setup with lights. They grow on their windowsill. So what I put out here is basically compatible, not just because you've got, let's say, adverse conditions in winter, but this will work for you as a safeguard against any kind of overdoing something at the wrong time of year, even if you think that you've got ideal conditions. And that is where you can start tweaking things and seeing how far can you push the envelope with the quantities and the suggestions I make on my videos. I hope that makes sense.
60 parts per million of calcium, magnesium, and 40 parts per million of H organic, filling the reservoir with the Epsom salts at 100 parts per million. You thought, well, that's a bit conservative. All my
Right.
numbers are conservative.
Right.
I
Oops, I
prefer
just
to err
mentioned
on the
that.
side of caution when
Yes.
it comes to salt buildup in my pots. But when you saw 100 parts per million for Epsom salts, the magnesium application that I do once a month exclusively as a soak, and now you see that 2 times a month I
There we
add
go.
CalMag into
Well, I
the
did
pot.
clarify
There's
that.
already more magnesium coming in, and my fertilizer also has magnesium. So what they are doing as in sub.
And not every fertilizer has magnesium, because you can fertilize orchids with a conventional fertilizer for houseplants. You just reduce the quantity to maybe a quarter or whatever the parts per million that I see you, Danya. Whatever parts per million you're going to put in, you can use a conventional fertilizer, but it may not have any calcium or magnesium in it because it's not targeted towards orchids. So these little supplement cards, they will come in real good handy if in case you want to try that out. All right, so for example, Danya says, if in summer we give 300 parts per million for a big plant, we can give 200 parts per million regular fertilizer and also add 60 parts per million of calcium and 40 parts per million of seaweed. Yes, but separately. So if you are going to fertilize your orchid, no matter what kind of fertilizer you use, I recommend to keep it separate. Today you're fertilizing. That pot is going to get dry. You need to then either water or fertilize again, but you're going to opt, let's say, for a CalMag and seaweed soak. The next time you do that, not a soak. The next time you fill up your reservoir or you water your orchids, you're going to give them CalMag separately at 100 parts per million. I would not combine them, and I would not reduce a fertilizer parts per million in order to then add a CalMag and seaweed solution, because the orchid is going to need the fertilizer at its highest quantity that the orchid can handle. If you reduce that, you see, a fertilizer is energy, etc. A supplement is the same as what we do. When we eat our normal food during the day, we have our veggies and hopefully have a balanced diet. But then we take a vitamin supplement, let's just say, and it provides us with all the extra minerals. That is the same for orchids. So you don't want to skip on a main meal for your orchid, let's just say the fertilizer, reduce the portion, and then give them a good helping of dessert. It won't work. I hope that makes sense. If an orchid needs 300 parts per million, give it 300 parts per million, and then next time water with a CalMag solution or do a calcium magnesium soak. Sorry, I'm getting soaks wrong. I have to stick with my terminology. Always give your orchids the fertilizer that it requires. Do not skimp on that. Then, on the next go around, give them calcium and magnesium and seaweed separately, also at the top bracket that you can. And then switch back to fertilizer. And you only need to do that, let's say, once or twice a month with the supplements. I hope I didn't just really mess that up, Danya. Let me know. I'm just going to take a drink of water. Okay. Thank you. Because I'm trying to keep my mind really, really focused on what I'm seeing, but I can see the tangent where I'm getting off on. I appreciate that. Thank you, Danya. Okay. Right, moving on.
Supplementing will supplement what is already in the fertilizer.
I'm not rushing, okay? I'm not rushing. I'll stop at any time.
Once monthly silicon.
This is mainly for inorganic growing, all right? Silicon is naturally available in tiny, tiny traces in organic media, and the microbes, the bacteria breaking down that media, there's always a teeny tiny little bit of silicon in our organic media. Inorganic media is void of everything. There is nothing. So silicon is fantastic for cell growth and also to strengthen cuticles, which makes it very difficult for bugs to bite into the cuticles, making the orchids more resilient against pests, also more resilient against cold. And you can see, I'm not going to explain why spring fall. It is safe. That is why spring fall. Now, this is something that I start applying a little bit more regularly, especially from my experience of last winter. With this winter, I was putting silicon into my orchids all the way up until November. They had their last soak, and I literally soak them. The mask gets filled and 30 minutes, etc. I don't water them. I don't put the silicon into the reservoir because I don't have the time for the orchid to absorb it when the temperatures start to drop. They need it fast so that they can respond accordingly. So it is not a must if you're growing in organic media, but I didn't want to exclude that because I didn't want people to be putting into the questions, what about organic growing? What about organic growing? The answer would have been the same. You can do it. You don't have to do it. There's nothing wrong if you do it. You can't overdo it. But if you're growing in inorganic media purely and then using the cleanest water, you need to do it every once in a while. Maybe not as often as I am doing it, but for what I wanted to put out into this video is to be on the safe side. That is why I say what I say. At least twice during the growing season, at least. Now you see, I have not put any recommendation into this card because it is optional for everybody based on their own conditions and circumstances. But I have done it once a month since 2020 because I am completely inorganic and I use RO water. My orchids would not get any of this stuff at all. So, and then of course it is my pH up if I get too heavy-handed with the pH down. So, you know, if you're growing in organic and you see this, don't panic. You don't need it, all right? But for inorganic growing, you do need it.
Silicon application at 100 parts per million, pHing its media. And then I use seaweed only 3 times a week as a foliar spray application.
This is definitely what I do a lot because I have to mist my orchids a lot. And I also only do it spring through fall. I try to back off for two reasons with regards to the seaweed. One is as the fall hits and we head into winter, I can't be that generous with my misting anymore. I don't want to cause any rot. Secondly, the fact that my seaweed has growth hormones in it, I don't want to be pushing something into their system if they're continuous growers, knowing what circumstances they are going to be faced with in a couple of weeks, and their hormones are much slower. So my fertilizer application, for example, in October may kick in middle of December, and then we've got problems because of my circumstances. However, if your circumstances are ideal and you're growing al fresco and you're outside, lots of airflow, even though the temperatures might drop marginally, you just keep using seaweed. Your continuous growers are going to love you for it. Do not use seaweed on any resting orchids. They're sleeping. They don't need fertilizer. They don't need anything but the occasional watering, simply because if we cannot provide the dew effect they would get out in nature, or the constant fog around their roots like they would have in cloud forests, even if they are resting, do not use seaweed. The orchid A may not take it up, but if it does, for example, if you have a nice warm spell of 10 days, a false spring, so to speak, right? You got a false spring coming in February and it's not even March, April yet, but you're in a climate that gives you the feeling, wow, we've come through the worst of it. I see you, Danya. Orchid Ninja Chris-san, hello, it's good to see you. So if you have that kind of sense of, oh, we're actually over it, I'm going to start with seaweed, get them some growth hormones so that they can get a head start. Don't do it, because you never know that after 10 days, the temperatures are going to drop again. Your orchids may start to wake up after day 5, 6. It's super slow, but they may start to, have a little peek. Oh, it's warm. So their own hormones are already going to start to mobilize during that resting period, simply because now we've had several days of gorgeous warmth. You're going to add seaweed onto what they're mobilizing at the wrong time. The temperatures are going to drop again. The orchid has now got a double whammy of what they are already naturally doing because the temperatures are rising. Now you've hit them with growth hormones, temperatures drop, and they have to just keep going because that's what their system is doing, and they've got too many hormones. It's going to be a real, I don't know how to say it, but it's like it's a confusion thing. They've got too much based on what the temperatures are telling them they should be doing, if that makes sense. Like you're having right now, exactly, Sandy. Something like that. Be very careful, because I'm also of the kind like, it's warming up. What can I do? What can I do? Who can I play with? And whoa, the best thing is to wait. Okay. Instead of soaking in CalMag, can we airflow? Airflow. Can you define what you're asking me, Danya, please? Can you airflow, or do you mean spray instead of so? I'm not entirely sure. Oh, hello. Sorry. The next comment. Yes, you can. Make sure your humidity is high though, because if you've got a constant breeze going, you've got warm temperatures, your your water will evaporate way quickly, and your CalMag may just be sitting either on your mount or your pot or your leaves and just drip on the surface of the pot and not get absorbed, if that makes sense. But you can definitely do a foliar spray. That works wonders, because even seaweed, it works great. Just make sure that you're on top of it with very high humidity, and I consider 75% and up very high. 60% is acceptable, but then bring your airflow down until at least the water has time to absorb and not dry out. What I do in circumstances, in my case, where I have to go around 3 or 4 times a day, I start with a foliar spray in the mornings for the orchids on the mounts, and they get it everywhere. Once I've gone around one circle, I then take my normal water and spray again, because after 30 minutes, things are still damp but slowly drying out. And then I go again after 30 minutes with clear, plain water and wash anything off that may, be too much excess or could just dry out, if that makes sense. Abundant airflow is important when you're foliar spraying. However, you need to make sure that if you don't have high humidity, that you back it up with plain, clean water, because there's a lot of damage. I mean, I have a lot of stained roots as well. That's a signal there. If you've got a lot of staining on your velamen, especially the new velamen, then that is because the seaweed had not really gotten a chance to absorb fully before the wind and the breeze came out and dried everything up. So little bit of seaweed, stays on the velamen and it's permanent. Nothing wrong with it, but sometimes we like to see our velamen all nice and shiny before it gets all algae and old. And yeah, just to let you know, airflow is important to somewhat counteract with very high humidity. And if you don't have high humidity, like in my case, follow it up with foliar spraying with plain water back to back. And then if the conditions are ideal, you can do it twice a day. You can foliar spray in the morning, back it up with plain water. And then if you're really, on top of things, do it exactly the same late afternoon, not during lunchtime, but late afternoon, because our warm and balmy and yummy nights in the summer, they're so nice. I'm spraying again at 8 p.m. here where I'm at, and then I back it up once again with plain water. So that is possible. And anyway, the orchids are all gung-ho with the hormones. Yeah, me too, Danya. Me too. A lot of airflow here in the summer, that to the point I was starting at one end and I was really hustling that even before I got halfway through, I went back and addressed orchids I already sprayed, basically cutting things in half because it was just too risky. There's no point in risking it. And then some days I just had to skip. It was just plain water, plain water, plain water, and a lot of it. So, you have to sometimes cut your losses and say, I can't do it today because it's not going to be effective. I'm just throwing product into the wind.
Only. And I use that at a concentration of 40 parts per million.
Yes, and that's another thing. Don't do too much thinking that, well, I'm going to do it now and because I'm going to be washing it off later, like shortly. Stay at a low concentration level because we're not perfect. If we make a mistake with the balance of humidity, airflow, and I don't know what, then, if you're going to go in at 100 parts per million because you mean well, it's not going to help. It's not going to do damage, but it's just going to evaporate and not absorb at all. There you go. Comes with a hurricane, and every hurricane has a name. Your airflow has a name.
6.5 pH. Now, I have to be very, very cautious.
Okay, let her finish her thought.
With what I say here, because if you are in a controlled environment, foliar spraying may raise alarm bells, and rightly so. New growths are coming, crowns would be wet. So no matter whether you use seaweed or any kind of other foliar fertilizing, ensure adequate airflow. I am lucky that I can grow in my climate outdoors for 80% of the year, and I have extremely low humidity. So I go around with my sprayer a lot.
Okay, we've been there. This woman is right. Hello, Pix Mahler. It's good to see you. I'm so glad you could catch this live as well. It's good to see you. Hope you're having a fabulous day, maybe late afternoon, early evening. But yeah, so there we go. Let me just see if I have anything more to add on this. The whole thing with the hormones and the airflow and the humidity is super, super important. Okay, we did address rhino skin. Let me see what she has to say about rhino skin.
To interfere with the nutrients that I'm trying to get into my orchids.
Oh, by the way, yeah, poor lady, I didn't even let her finish her thought. Anyway, but yeah, if you're indoors, same balance requires. I wouldn't worry in the warmer climate, warmer temperatures to be foliar spraying indoors. I would ask why, even mounts could be soaked while indoors, but having said that, each to their own. But there is no risk during the summer. Very, very rarely do you lose a new growth during the warmer months of the year because of rot. Very rarely. Something else is going on for that to happen. And if somebody were to approach me and said, my my growth rotted out in summer. I was foliar spraying. I would say you need more calcium in your orchid for that to not ever happen again. So that's just my opinion right there. Please correct me at any moment in time if you have a different experience.
I use a synthetic pH down and I use silicone as a pH up. If I was too heavy-handed on the pH down, a few drops.
Yes, I mentioned that earlier. Again, not affiliated with any of these products. I'm from Africa. I saw the rhino. I said, that's it. I'm using this product. Meanwhile, it served me well. True story, though. That's how I decided to buy this product. Simply just because I said, yep, rhino. If they had put a giraffe in there, if they have a version that is actually a growth hormone seaweed, I would use their product as well if it had a giraffe on it, because, long neck, long growth. That would be my thinking. And if I want something fat and chubby for my little Rapiculus laelia, put an elephant on a product. I'm having it. Anyway, so yeah, here's the thing. Organic fertilizers, inorganic fertilizers. Because I am doing what I'm doing, I am using inorganic fertilizers. That is an oxymoron. What on earth? I'm so glad I can correct myself before I keep going. Synthetic fertilizers. So organic fertilizers or synthetic fertilizers. Now, seaweed is organic, so I'm not mixing or matching. I've got, for example, CalMag and seaweed. I am comfortable to mix and match the organic with the synthetic right there. It's just because I have seen it done. I have done it myself, and I'm quite happy that I'm not adding another component together with the CalMag that's going to cancel it out. Seaweed is not going to cancel out any nutrients out of a CalMag solution. Anyway, however, yes, there are cheaper ways to pH down your solution. And I would not say don't do it, because if it's working for you, then great. I cannot do that for myself. I cannot bring myself to use citric acid or to use bicarbonate of soda, because I am not sure whether one thing is going to cancel out another nutrient. So I stay, I'm like 1 + 1 = 2. And if that makes sense to me in my head, that is what I'm doing. I have tried with a smaller collection back in my day. I tried to use lemon juice, but I needed quite a bit of lemon juice to bring down my pH. And all of a sudden, what am I doing with my potassium levels in my fertilizer? Lemons also have potassium in them. Suddenly, I need a little bit more of the lemon juice with more potassium. I'm fertilizing. Do you see where I'm heading here? So I'm not saying you cannot use any other kind of pH downs, especially this day and age with the climate. There's also cheaper to use citric acid, because that'll last for donkey's years. For my head, my sanity, my self-confidence, I go with synthetics throughout. And that is also why I don't use bicarbonate of soda as a pH up. I use rhino skin. Now, the last time I brought pH down was at the beginning of, no, in the middle of 2020. And I'm still using that bottle. I'm not saying Kana is the best product in the world. I'm still using from this bottle because I only need 1 drop. My fertilizer does everything pretty much very well to get it to the pH I need. And when it comes to doing CalMag or dropping my pH down to 5.8 because of what I want to achieve in my pots, that is another video that I have on my channel, but that is when I use a little bit more pH than necessary. So you see, when it comes to cost effective, the purchase synthetic pH down, it's really not that expensive, even though the bottle may say, in my case, 20 euros, and my citric acid will say 1 euro. For peace of mind and how long I've been going through this bottle, you can see it's quite faded already. I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine with this. So I'm not banging on about the products. It's what I'm comfortable with, and whatever works for you. I just get so freaked out when I think nutrient lockout. My head goes tilt and I'm like, oh no, I can't let that happen. But that's because I do not have an understanding on the subject matter of the percentages of which nutrients can get locked out because one is too high. Meanwhile, I don't put bananas in my fertilizer supplement either. So there's that. Bananas high in potassium. Haha, pun intended. Sorry.
Depending on the value of the pH I come out with, if I was too heavy-handed, a drop or two of silicon will raise well, but that for safe, as I make large batches, it is worth my while. For
Yes.
small collections, a few drops of lemon juice.
Yeah. Oops, I just bashed the mic. That's not an audio problem. If you hear something crackling, that was me. I bashed the mic because I'm talking with my hands here. I feel like a gangster wrapped up in my blanket. Like one of those, I just need the big long golden chain around me with my sunglasses on and we're going to town. Whew, it's cold outside. Anyway, oh, now what was I going to say? Oh yes, for small batches, absolutely lemon juice, 2 or 3 drops. If you only have to fertilize 5 or 6 orchids, then it's fine. You're not going to do any damage. When I was talking large batches, I'm trying to pH down a big bucket of fertilizer solution. That'll take half a lemon at least. So, and then the acidity of the lemons differ as well. It was just too much for me. So small collection with small batches of fertilizer, just lemons, perfect.
Juice, fresh lemon juice will do the trick of pH down as well. But I'm talking small collections, maybe 20 orchids or less. When it comes to large batches of nutrient solution, if I set it for purposes only. What I want to achieve with this video
Family photo.
is to make it simple, break it down, tweakable as per necessity, because some people like nutmeg and other people prefer allspice in their cookies and cakes.
All right. Speaking of ingredients, speaking of recipe cards, that is where the whole concept came on with regards to making my little recipe cards available to anybody who would like to have them, and obviously tweak them. Like I said, some people like nutmeg in their cookies and some people would prefer allspice, but that is then your personalized recipe. But this should have hopefully helped to maybe, unjumble some thoughts, especially as we're now heading into the growing season for our hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is still in their full growing season, mind you. But, when I said before, we're planning 3 months ahead with what we're doing today, then, hopefully this will help as well. So the question is, are there any questions? Just a thought. It's not a trick question. If you would like me to go through and take them up one by one, I can take out all the tickers and everything, and you can see the full screen. I can Can you hear me? Did you hear me the past 2 minutes? Oh dear. Okay. Right. Okay, so what happened there was because I wanted to have the recipe card as a full screen, I took myself out of the screen without realizing that that would mute me. And I don't want that. You see, I want the pretty blooms in the center, not down there. So that's what I was doing. I'm sorry. Okay. Does anybody want the recipe cards do you want me to flip through them one by one? This is where I was headed. Or I can also, well, I'm going to link the video in the description, and you can visit the video there because they're exactly the same. I have not tweaked them. And on top of that, you can screenshot there and revisit that information. If something here with my, getting certain verbiage confused got you confused. Okay, well, I'm hoping that you can hear me. I can see my bubble is up and running. I'm not on mute. I know, Danya, and I wanted that in the middle of the screen. That's what I wanted in the middle of the screen. And why is it down there? Why is it off to the right? Why doesn't it go into the middle? When I practice, oh, wait a second. Nope. When I practiced this earlier on, we got it. We got it. There we go. I was practicing this earlier on. So yeah, that's what I want, not this bubble thing down there. But anyway, I can flip through the things. I can answer any questions you may have. I can also put up the pH nutrient absorption chart if you want me to. And I can also drop a link into the chat, not the description, get your verbiage right, into the description and see if there are any questions and somebody wants to come up and we can have a little bit of a chit chat. And then I was singing The Price is Right tune while I was waiting and muted, dee 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 dee. So I thought, okay, well, maybe the universe didn't want you to hear that. And well, full transparency here, low budget production. Oh, you already did that. Okay, Sandy, that's awesome. All right, good to know. I appreciate that. I hope that they will prove useful. And as always, and with anything in my channel, no matter the video. Thank you, Chris. Son, I'm glad we have a massive lag tonight. A massive lag. My goodness. It's more than 11 seconds. Incredible. Wow, I've been talking here. I know we're talking about orchids, but does somebody know how much ppm is needed for houseplant? Double. Start with double. Thank you, Anita, for that. Danya, start with double and then raise according to whatever size your houseplant is. If you have a big fiddle leaf, fig, whatever it's called, if it's a big one, you can do 1,000 parts per million as a starting point. If you have smaller little ones, succulents and all those, don't fertilize those. But if you have, let's say, begonias or something that are growing really well and they're in a normal house plant sized pot, you can do 500 parts per million to start up with and then see how they can handle it and see what happens at the surface of your media. Same thing with salt buildup when it comes to house plants. That is my recommendation. Of course, there are plenty of opinions in the chat and I'm sure they'll be happy to share. Okay. Alrighty, so that would be it for me today if I don't have any further questions from anybody. Oh my goodness, Andyland, Q&A time. Alrighty, thank you, Andyland. I'm so glad I closed that screen. I saw your screenshot in the back there. You're very welcome. And that's the problem, you see, Danya, when you look at let's say a houseplant fertilizer, they'll just tell you half a cup or, half a cap, like a half a cap full for X amount of liters. But here you've got a tiny little pot. Maybe you've got a string of pearls. It doesn't, you know what I mean? String of pearls also don't need much, but let's just say it just says this, that, and the other. I think that when we come to growing orchids, we suddenly realize and understand a lot more about fertilizer. And then we look at our houseplants. And then we kind of go, now what do I do? And that's exactly where I would be if I had houseplants. I would be like, what did I do back then? Start all over again. She smells of roses. Beautiful, elegant roses. Not the smell that you get when you buy roses that are commercial. Danya, you know, sometimes commercial roses have a nice fragrance, but it's like a soggy washcloth fragrance. It's supposed to be floral, but you can't really smell it. No, she smells, oh, I can only say divine. It's like inhale, pass out. Revive, inhale, pass out. And repeat. Yes, with normal tap water, that'll be fine. Check the surface of the pot. Make sure that there's no white bits at the surface. That would be your salt accumulating. And if you get that, then reduce. Patricia's orchid says, I split my maximum in September and now have 6 with roots and new growth. Not sure. Oh my goodness. And it still wants to grow. Yeah, I have been doing the luxury of not moving my maxima in at the nights that were all the way to 10. Now I'm not comfortable. Now I bring her in, especially because I am in self-watering and lekker. So no, she comes inside now. Let me just type something in the chat here. Hang on a second. I'm sitting here half in the dark. I'm trying to make sure that I've got the keyboard going, because if I type something rude, that would be a complete mistake. But it would be awkward. So Andy Land has questions. Patricia, if you do not see Pixmala's comment, there is somebody here in the chat that will help you get rid of some of your 6 beautiful maximas. I remember your maxima being one heck of a grower. Gorgeous. No wonder that you've split it. I'm not surprised. But yeah, that is a beautiful mother plant you have there. So wet roots and cold definitely do not mix. Anyway, let me get to Andy Land's question, because he had some that he left in the comments of the notification for this live stream. How long is a nutrient solution viable after mixing it up? Now, let me tell you, this is dependent on where you're at, what temperature you're keeping your nutrient solution at, and that you keep it out of light. Also, what kind of nutrient solution you have. If you have organic, use it immediately, maybe next day, but that's the maximum. I wouldn't use it beyond 24 hours if you've not used it up on organic solution. Synthetic, I would say you can definitely get away with it for 2 weeks. Again, I am being very conservative with my answer here because I want to be on the safe side, because I do not know what fertilizer is being used. And for anybody listening to this, I still don't know what fertilizer is being used. So I'm going to be very conservative. If by your experience, your fertilizer being mixed up will last for a month or 6 weeks, that is great. Just because I'm saying 2 weeks doesn't mean you have to throw it away. That is me just giving an answer that is safe, that I know a synthetic fertilizer can hold on to if it is of the soluble kind. All right, if it is a synthetic fertilizer that has been pre-mixed, then of course manufacturer labels are there and they will tell you when the expiry date is. The next question from Andy Land is, should you adjust fertilizer levels based off of your water's starting ppm? Yes. And no, depending on how you look at it. All right. So if your water has a ppm of 100 parts per million and you are going to add 300 parts per million of fertilizer into your solution, make sure that you then have 400 parts per million in your solution, which will include your fertilizer and the starting parts per million of your water. Now, if you have horrendous water that has a parts per million reading of 350 to 400, just as a figure. I'm just going to throw it out there. And you want to add fertilizer, and you want to do it at 300 parts per million, you need to be fully aware that you are going to be putting approximately 600, 650 parts per million into your pot, and not all of it is fertilizer, and salt buildup is going to be a problem. If you are growing bare root, it is not going to be a problem because you are hosing things down or soaking them and then draining the container. Words, they're hard tonight. So make sure that if you have high parts per million in your water and you do not have access to much cleaner water, as in with a low parts per million, you need to know how much you are actually throwing at your orchids. The only thing I cannot tell you is do not deprive your orchids because of your high parts per million in your water. Your orchids need their food. Because your tap water is high doesn't mean, oh, I don't want to go too high with my fertilizer, so I'm only going to add 100. You're going to see deficiencies very, very quickly, all right? So unfortunately, if there is dirty water, as I like to call it, just because it's sort of the simple way of saying it might look clean, but it is actually very high in parts per million. The best thing is to find a water source that doesn't have that high parts per million, so that you're not throwing the kitchen sink at your orchid in the pot or even outside if you're just hosing it down. Do you know of any visual indicators for specific nutrient deficiencies? I absolutely do. And I'm going to leave descriptions of my nutrient deficiency videos. You see, in the link. If I was going to finish that sentence the way my brain had associated it, it would have made no sense at all. So let's turn that around. And I'm going to leave the link of those videos in the description if you would like to have a look at them again. Also, we did a live stream recently with the nutrient deficiencies, with the pH, etc. So there are many, many signals. I also explain about the variables of cold damage, cold stress looks like magnesium deficiency, etc., and did the comparison there. So links will be in the description. Do you have any tips for managing your collection's nutrient schedule as a whole? Absolutely. I also have a video on that where I say how I fertilize a collection of 300 plus orchids, and they're all doing different things. How do I keep track of everyone? That video will also be linked, but in a nutshell, if you're in active growth, you're getting fertilizer. And we've just gone through the seasons. Based on the seasons, based on my conditions or your conditions, active growth, fertilizer. If you're resting, you get nada, maybe a little bit of water here and there, just to make sure that you know I'm still around, not you, the orchid. I'm still here, still watching you, waiting for you to wake up. My seasonal orchid care, the 3 seasons I always refer to: active growth, dormant resting, and starting or blooming out, etc. Those are the 3 that I consider the growth seasons of an orchid. If you're resting, like I said, you get a little bit of water, a little bit of love. I touch and look at you, make sure you don't have any pests. I move on. If you're in bloom, you're still getting full on fertilizer. If you're a species and you bloom and then you don't do anything, because I know you don't do anything after you've bloomed for the next 8 months, you get flushed, period. So I look at what my orchids do. And this is actually really quick. It's a quick way of sorting out. It doesn't mean the whole orchid we need to know the rhythm. It's just, what are you doing? Woohoo, you're growing. Fertilizer. How long are you growing? Who cares? Fertilizer. You're asleep. Great. Sleep. Hi. Here's some water. Move on. How long are you sleeping? Well, depends. If I see nubbins, new growth, that is when I start up again. And if you're in bloom, thank you so much. I know that the orchid needs a little bit of energy throughout its blooming season. If it's a vigorous hybrid, sometimes new growths are already popping out at the base. I continue to fertilize because now we're talking new growths. That's in a nutshell. But the seasonal orchid care, I shall also link that in the description. Andy Land, you're so sweet. I'm sorry for that little moment of silence. I had to read that comment. Seeing as for a moment there, you probably thought, oh, she forgot my questions. Here's me asking for questions to be sent. And then I'm like, yeah, if nobody's got any questions. Anyway, that's me. Okay, those are the questions that I had pre-directly sent in, and sorry for that little bit of a technical hiccup there for the moment. I was talking to myself as per usual. Thank you, Danya, so much for your time. I appreciate that you are here, that you made it, that you were also asking about houseplants, because at the end of the day, I am so wrapped up. I have one pot of self-watering with a houseplant in it, and it's doing great. I'm surprised because I don't know, man. I'm so wrapped up in the orchids. But yeah, very, very happy. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. So appreciate your time. Know that your support is appreciated. And just before you go, make sure that you stay safe. And I hope to see you next time. Fernanda, meine liebe Freundin, obrigado. You take care. Hasta luego. Bye.